Hello everyone, my name is Crystal Hicks.
And my name is Lucy Malarkey.
And we're from WISH, which is womeninSocialHousing.org, and you're listening to the If I Had One Wish podcast.
This is a podcast where we delve deeper into stories from inspirational women who work in the social housing sector, to understand the barriers that they've overcome, to be inspired by their journeys, and to learn from their experiences. And we'll of course be asking the big question: if they had one wish, what would it be and why?
Hello everybody, and welcome to today's episode of the If I Had One Wish podcast. I am Crystal Hicks, President of Women and Social Housing, and my co-host today is Michelle Donovan. Hi Michelle.
Hi Crystal. Yes, I'm Michelle Donovan. Lovely to be here. I'm a board member for the London Wish Network, and I'm head of independent living at Centrepoint.
Lovely, fantastic. Thanks, Michelle, for joining me. So we've got a really good guest today on the podcast. We are joined by Gera Patel. So Gera has worked in the not-for-profit social housing sector for over 30 years and joined Campbell Tickell as a senior consultant in 2008 and is now a partner. She leads the practices in HR, OD, and the recruitment business, and is able to usefully combine this with her wider consultancy portfolio. She's got a really strong track record of working successfully with executives and board teams, bringing insight and a bit of challenge, and her approach is to get the best out of people. She's been described as really effective in her support to candidates, helping them to develop their offers to their organisations and ultimately progress their career paths. Gera, it is fantastic to have you with us today.
Oh, lovely to be here this afternoon, Crystal and Michelle. Thank you so much for inviting me in for a chat. No pressure for me to follow those other amazing podcasts that you've done, but let's see how we go.
I'm sure this is going to be really interesting. I cannot wait to get into it, Gera. So let's, in that fashion, just dive right in. So in these conversations, as you will have heard, we're really wanting to hear about the experiences of female leaders and change makers like yourself, so our listeners can really appreciate your journey, the challenges that you've overcome as well, and some of those lessons and sort of tidbits of wisdom that you can share. So let's start off on that. Tell us about your career journey. What brought you into social housing, and why, after 30 plus years, are you still here?
I'm really embarrassed to say that it was an ex-boyfriend that brought me into social housing entirely by accident. So I'd never thought about housing as a career. I'd graduated as a researcher, a social researcher, and I was sort of doing a few jobs sort of here and there, pondering about a career in the NHS. And then I got a job in the charity sector working for the Children's Society, doing a really interesting piece of work around the treatment of Black and Asian young people who were running away from home and from care institutions. And I was very happily doing that, living in Wales. I had a boyfriend who conveniently lived in Bristol. He then decided to move to London because he got a job working actually in a homelessness organisation, Michelle, at a youth and church-based organisation working directly with supporting homeless people. And when he said he was moving to London, I thought, oh, well, that kind of sounds exciting. I'll move to London. So I looked in the jobs page in The Guardian on a Wednesday, as you used to do back in the day, and there was this job for this really interesting organisation called the Federation of Black Housing Organisations, who were looking for a researcher. And I thought, well, I've got a degree in research, I'll apply for that. Amazingly, they invited me for an interview, and I didn't know at the time how important this work was going to be, because the person on the panel who was interviewing me was Dr. Christine Whitehead. And I'm ashamed to say that I didn't know of her before. I remember going to the library, this is how long ago it was, and looking up what housing associations were. And so I was interviewed by Christine, and of course she was tremendous. I mean, she's been such a hugely influential person in our sector because of her academic work. Anyway, another miracle occurred because I got this job at FBHO, and so began my career in housing. And I think housing is definitely one of those industries where once it grabs you, it grabs you. And so I've never consciously thought of leaving. I've been in this sector for around 30 years. I think the sector does an incredible job with huge amounts of challenge. We don't always get it right. Over the last few years, that has felt particularly challenging. But for me, the motivation around staying in this sector is very much about that really, really tangible difference that we make. We would be a much poorer nation without the delivery of affordable housing. Yes, we need to deliver more of it. Yes, we need to kind of do it better. But actually, without it, things would be a whole lot worse than they are now. So I'm incredibly proud to play a really small part in the sector. I don't see myself as a change agent. I see myself as somebody who finds the talent that's going to be the change agent. And so I never planned to work in recruitment. Again, that just kind of happened by accident. James Patel and Greg Campbell were running the practice and running it very successfully. And they asked me if I would look after recruitment for a little bit because they had a bit of a gap in the management structure. And I said that I would. And then 16 years later, I'm still here and still running recruitment. But for me, the change agents are the people that I help to recruit. Those chief executives, those chairs, those executive directors, those heads of housing, whatever level you're working at, whatever field you're working in, it's those people who make the change. And I love being a part of that. I love finding the right person for an organisation and then seeing that person flourish and make the difference. So I would never describe myself as the change agent. I think my job is very much about helping the sector to find its own change agents.
It's interesting you say about not choosing housing. I think very few people do choose housing. I feel that housing chooses us. Certainly was for me and for a lot of people that I've worked with.
I mean, you're much younger than me, but I think for people of our generation, it did really feel like you fell into housing by accident. I wonder what it is that we're doing now that might make children and younger people think about our industry with more intent and be able to see that it's one of the few places where you get to think and act really commercially, but in a social values framework. And I don't think there's a lot of spaces where you can do that and do it in a way that you feel like you've got that balance right. And so I think as much as kind of my story and maybe your story, Michelle, has been about we found our way into this place by accident and now it's been great for us. But I think maybe the challenge is we need to kind of keep finding the way for other people. And maybe there is something about people looking to join social housing with that real intention.
Thank you. So obviously you're an experienced female leader and you would have, over your 30 plus years, you would have seen so many challenges across the sector. What do you think are the biggest challenges you faced and overcome? And what are the lessons for all of us moving forward and for that next generation of younger people coming into the industry?
Yeah, I think my challenges might feel a little bit dated now. So, well, maybe not. I think there's definitely something about when I was coming up through the ranks, as it were, in housing. The things that challenged me are, actually probably the things that kind of challenge a lot of women in the workplace. So I didn't always feel confident about stuff. I was never quite sure of what my offer was. I hadn't really had jobs that were very well defined. I'd gone from one thing to another. So I think describing myself as having a career path is a little bit of an exaggeration. I just feel like I've done a collection of jobs and have ended up where I am, and where I am now is great. And that collection of jobs has kind of served me really well. So I think my challenges were quite personal. I did experience things along the way, as you would when you're a woman of colour and you're kind of, working in the UK. And it's not so much that I don't want to talk about those things, but I feel like my focus has been kind of very much about taking that challenge, trying to do something with it, trying to kind of work my way through it, trying to fight my way through it in some cases, or trying to find a turnaround and then kind of seeing what comes out the other side. So the challenge for me has been very personal. How I experience those things that happen to me feel very personal, but I think me kind of being able to overcome them has also been a personal journey. So I don't know if I've got something that I would describe as the biggest challenge in my career, but I think there's been a collection of things that have kind of shaped the way I think, and have kind of led me to this position that I'm in now. But I would also say that when you talk about challenge, it's also really good to talk about opportunity. So, when I reflect upon the opportunities that I've had in this career path that I've taken, those have been much more meaningful, much more impactful. They have definitely been the things that have spurred me on, the people that I've met, the opportunities that I've been given, the opportunities that I created for myself. Those are the things that I kind of tend to focus on, because there's something there about how we continue to learn. I spend a lot of my time giving feedback to candidates, because I'm often delivering selection processes where lots of people apply and only one person is going to be successful. The numbers ain't great, the odds are stacked against you. And so a lot of my time is about giving feedback to people who weren't successful in a process. And I always try to get them to focus on what also worked really well. I think when we're unsuccessful in processes, there's a tendency to kind of really hone in on, well, could I have done this better? Should I have said that? How might this have been more impactful? And I think in doing that, it's good to focus on that. But I think it's also really important to focus on what you did brilliantly and how you might be able to build upon that. So whenever I'm challenged to think about challenges, I also try to think about opportunities, which sounds a little bit Pollyanna of me, I've just realised, but I feel like it's served me in pretty good stead.
They're often two sides of the same coin.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you've touched on recruitment there, and I'd love us to go down into that mystical world of recruitment. So Women in Social Housing, we do so many online events and in-person events up and down the country every year, and you can guarantee recruitment or developing in your career topics, hot topics, very popular topics for that program of events. And I think it is because perhaps for women it can feel like quite a daunting space. You'll have loads of experience. You will have met so many candidates over your career, and I suppose I'm just interested from that place of expertise. You see any sort of common differences between the way women who are considering applying for a role might approach it compared to their male counterparts?
Yeah, I guess I see more of what happens after somebody has decided to apply. But I think you're right, Crystal. There are considerations out there, because there are opportunities aplenty, jobs aplenty in the sector at the moment. I think we've seen a real spike in merger activity in our sector. We've seen this kind of hugely important focus on building safety, on the customer experience. We've got new regulatory legislation that supports that. And so there are different jobs coming on stream all the time. So there are plenty of jobs, I think, to kind of be applying for. I think in making a decision to apply for something or not apply for something, it's famously said, isn't it, that women tend to look at the person specification and go, oh, well, I can only do 80% of that, I won't apply, and men might have a different response. I don't know if I've got hard evidence of that, but what I do see is people in selection processes who are still questioning whether they should be applying for the job that they've already applied for. So there's a nervousness, an insecurity, a kind of self-doubt about, oh no, was I right to go for this? Somehow I'm going to be exposed in some way. And I definitely see more women feeling and behaving like that than I see with male candidates. I think there's something about how do you decide what's the next step for you? How do you know whether this job or that job is going to be the right one for you? And all you can do is work with the information that you've got. So I always say to people, be really well prepared, do your research, ask around about this organisation and the people who work there, look at kind of what this organisation has accomplished, see if you can work out for yourself whether this role is going to meet your expectations for the impact that you want to make and the ambition that you have for yourself. And does that impact and ambition match what it is that the organisation is saying about itself? So I think it's good to be prepared before you even consider applying. And then once you have applied, I think that's when the real hard work kicks in. I'm always very mindful that certainly for the leadership roles that Campbell Tickell recruit to, we ask a lot of candidates. These are important positions. We need to give our clients assurance that we've found the right quality talent pool and we've got credible people in the pool who are going to be fantastic in the job. And therefore, you need to be really well prepared. I have a lot of conversations with people who say, well, I met the person specification and you're not seeing me for first interview. And I'm like, Yeah, because you put in a rubbish application. You put in an application that really wasn't very good quality. You put in an application that didn't demonstrate that you'd gone off and done your homework, that your enthusiasm for the role didn't come across in the paperwork that you submitted. So I always say to people, these are competitive processes from the get-go. You've got to bring your A game to your paperwork. You've got to bring your A game to the first interview. Again, I end up having conversations with people who say, oh, I was surprised that you asked me that level of questioning in the first interviews. I thought it was just going to be a chat. I thought it was just going to be a check on my CV. And I'm a bit like, this is an executive director role, with a 6-figure salary. Of course, the first interview isn't going to be a casual one. So I think there's something really important about, if you want to be a candidate in a selection process, 99.9% of the time it's going to be highly competitive. Get what I call match fit. Be prepared to kind of be in a competitive selection process that's going to ask a lot of you. And I think, yes, there might be some considerations of how men and women might look to that preparation differently, but I think all that you can do is be the best version of yourself in that process. And therefore, if you really want this opportunity, you owe it to yourself to put in the hard work, to be really well positioned to get that job. So I think for me, there's something very important about people taking a considered view. I would also say for the leadership roles that we're recruiting on for our clients, these aren't the types of roles where you put in an application just to see what happens. These aren't the types of roles where you think, oh, well, I'll get some good interview practice in. They're often really important senior roles. Put your application in if you really want this role, and kind of make sure you're kind of delivering on your A game right from the get-go, because we end up with, I don't know, if I think about the last senior role I did, we had about 40 applications. About 20 people were really good. We had to get that down to a manageable long list. We ended up seeing 9 people at long list stage, 4 people at final stage, and 1 person got the job. So think about those numbers. Think about the level of competition. I think maybe 10 years ago, if you more or less met the person's specification, your career path and your experience alone would probably have guaranteed you an interview. I don't think there are such guarantees these days. So it's competitive and you've got to be ready for that competition. Often, though, with women, the competition is with yourself. So it's the competition that you have with yourself where you're saying, am I ready for this? Can I do this? Is this the right thing to do? Am I right to be leaving the job that I'm in, whether I'm happy or not? And I think you need to kind of rehearse all of that with people that you trust. That might be your friends and family. Maybe in some cases it might be your colleagues at work. But I think it's good to have conversation with people that know you really well. I feel pretty certain that most of the time those people are going to say, yay, Michelle, of course you should be going for that job. You should have been going for it 5 years ago, for example. So there's something about the confidence that you can gain by speaking to those around you. And I think that's really important as well.
And I'll never forget, I went for quite a senior role a few years ago, and I got the job. And one of the bits of feedback they gave me was that mine was the best presented application throughout. Wow. So from the sort of writing the CV and the cover letter through to the presentation and how I answered the question, and and that really surprised me. But when I dug into it, they were saying, well, you are an advocate for this organisation when you come in, and how you present yourself internally and in reports, and your written work is just as important as giving a presentation in front of a room of people. I thought, gosh, I would never have thought that would have been a factor. When I think of the senior women I know in organisations, they take care in their work. They won't send me reports or emails that look sloppy. They're very thought through and well presented. Yeah, I think sometimes we sort of undervalue that quality that, as women we often have, around wanting our work to look professional and high quality. So yeah, drawing on those things as well that we do bring to the table, and seeing the value in those, and not just undermining them, thinking, oh, it's just it's a pretty CV.
Care and attention is so important. And as recruiters, we can definitely see that. We absolutely get a very strong sense of that. And that's kind of the assurance that we pass on to our clients. but our clients also see it. So when I send, the chair of a housing association 20 CVs for the chief executive role, of course they are going to align themselves to those applications that have thought really carefully about who this particular organisation is. They've thought really carefully about the values of this organisation and their strategic objectives. They've written a narrative that kind of speaks to that. We might say housing providers, they're all much of a muchness, but they're not. And so if you speak to the specifics of the organisation, if you demonstrate that you've taken time and care over this, if you help the readers of your CV and paperwork to kind of get that sense of kind of your personality and also your motivation, your high quality application will stand out for all of the right reasons. We do get mediocre CVs and supporting statements for some roles. And, when you're flicking through kind of 40 bits of paperwork, those kind of handful of people who have really taken time and care and consideration absolutely stand out. And I think that's what you want to aim for.
Yeah, that is interesting. Just very quickly before we move on. My daughter is 16. She's applying for first part-time jobs and helping her with a CV, and it is about that. It's about making it, not just having a CV as if you're going for retail or hospitality, they need to be relevant to that role, and that's one of the things we're trying to instill to her even now. Is that needs to be the thing they look at and they're impressed straight away, because that's the thing that's going to get you the foot in the door. Yeah,
and it speaks to the truth of who you are. I often get asked the question about, should I get my CV done by, a professional CV advisor? And I'm like, well, you can do, but don't let them produce somebody that somehow feels disconnected from who you are. If we invite you for interview, we want to see the person that we've been reading about. Don't leave us with this kind of thing of like, oh, she said this, but now she's kind of behaving like this. So I think there's something about owning that paperwork, owning the quality of the paperwork. And I think if you can get that right, it's going to position you really well.
So on to a slightly different topic. So over the past few months, we've seen leaders around the world turning away from EDI agendas, and those obviously sought to make workplaces more inclusive, diverse and equitable. What trend do you see in this, and what advice would you give to social housing organisations?
I think it's really worrying. I think it's very narrow in its perspective, and some things I read and hear about I just find alarming. So Campbell Tickell, as well as working in social housing, works with lots of organisations in the charity sector, and it's particularly difficult for them if they have funding streams that are reliant upon international funding. And, just hearing some of the messages, kind of both in America but also across Europe, just feel really concerning. So I think for the UK social housing sector, for me, there's a really important message around what's the purpose of our sector? Why do we exist in the way that we exist? What is it that we are seeking to achieve? And for me, ED&I sits very much at the heart of the social value that our housing sector delivers. So I would hope that there won't be a retraction in our sector. I would hope actually that there's a dialing up of this commitment, because we know that inclusivity is so important to the work that we do. We know that diverse teams that bring diverse perspectives are kind of so much stronger and kind of so much more effective in their roles. So actually, for me, I hope the opposite happens. I hope the kind of rhetoric around some of the negativity that we're seeing, that somehow a pursuit of ED&I is the reason for all of these really difficult kind of challenges that the world is having, which seems astonishing to me. But anyway, so I would hope that the sector kind of really grabs a hold of that and says, actually, there's something really brilliant going on here. There's a force for good here. And we should not just continue with what we're doing, we should step up what we're doing. So I would very much like to see the social housing sector being really bold in that space, perhaps kind of being even more vocal than it has been. I sometimes have conversations around ED&I that make me feel really tired and make me feel really old, because I feel like I've been having those conversations from when I first started working for FBHO, which was back in the early 90s, which was, a lifetime ago. And I've done some work recently with some colleagues that I knew back in the day, and we've all been a little bit like, Yeah, we're kind of having the same conversation, albeit in slightly different ways, albeit in slightly different rooms with kind of some different people. So the essence of kind of what, for example, the Black and minority ethnic housing association sector was kind of seeking to drive at all of those years ago kind of still feels hugely relevant today. The fact that kind of Wish has been going for the number of years that it has done, the fact that we've got Housing Diversity Network, all of these really important organisations that continue to spotlight why it's so important that our sector in particular focuses on ED&I. So for me, I hope there's a real kind of stepping up in this space. I would like to see more action. I would like to see more effective conversations and considerations. I would like ED&I to be not just the remit of a smaller group of people that care, but actually the remit of all of us, because for me, it absolutely goes to the heart of what it means to be a really fantastic provider in the social housing space.
So on to our final question now, which is the question we ask all of our guests and probably is the one that we get the most juicy answer to. But it goes like this. If you had one wish for the sector, what would it be and why?
So I thought really carefully about this and I thought I can't just have one wish.
You and everybody else, honestly.
I need at least two. So I'm not going to be greedy. I'm just going to ask for two because I do see this as kind of there being two halves to this story. And I see this in a lot of the women that I work with, both as clients and as colleagues. I see it in a lot of the candidates that I interview and meet along the way. And I've seen it in myself as well. And kind of, my friends and family and the women in my friends and family circle and the career journeys that they have made. Actually, can I just add a little story? We've got a family WhatsApp. So we're a fairly typical third generation immigrant family, come from an Indian background. My mum and dad came to this country, were married, but came separately very early on and were part of kind of a handful of Indian people that had arrived from our bit of India at the time. And they happened to settle in the Midlands and they had 7 children, all of whom are now married. Yes, just checking that they are. And, lots of kind of nieces and nephews, etc., etc. So we were like this big extended family. And we've got a family WhatsApp, and I posted a little something on International Women's Day about kind of all of the brilliant women in my family. And then my brother, who's a year older than me, wrote a list, which was just so extraordinary, of just some of the things that some of the women in our family are doing. And it was like such an impressive list. A sister-in-law who's running for the marathon, my nephew's girlfriend who works for an international development charity that supports children in war-torn conflict areas. He was kind enough to kind of mention what I do. My other sister who's raising a son and is seeking to kind of share sort of values and kind of aspirations with him. And there was this extraordinary collection. So, sorry, I'm rambling a little bit, but I think for me, that list really represented the extraordinary things that women in our family have done, but also how those extraordinary things have come to pass, which is why I feel like I need 2 wishes. So my first wish is for women. It's for women to really think about what it is that they do to take advantage of the opportunity that's around them. So the opportunity that they might not even think exists. How do they stay alert to grabbing things that are going to give them the exposure that they need, putting their hand up to kind of volunteer for things that is going to take them into different spaces, challenging themselves to kind of be considered for things, whether that's jobs or other opportunities that are, out of their comfort zone, that are going to kind of be a stretch. So my first wish is very much about women who are already working in our sector to be thinking really proactively about continuing to move forward and taking advantage of opportunity, and thinking very much about the women who are behind them, the women who are younger than them, the women who are still developing in their career. So I think there's something about how we as women support one another and bring each other on. And I think that's terribly important. But this isn't just a women's problem. This is about our sector as a whole. And so my second wish is very much about the sector continuing to step up into the space, the sector continuing to ask challenging questions of itself about what does leadership representation look like in our sector? Are we satisfied with how it looks? And if we're not satisfied, why is that? And what is it that we think that we can do about this? So I think those two wishes combined adds up to one really big wish, and I hope that that's okay.
No, that's brilliant. And you give us a fantastic example of a male ally in your storytelling. So we will grant you 2 wishes, Gera.
Thank you.
And thank you so much for being our guest today. I could speak to you for hours, and I'm sure you've got so many pearls of wisdom that you could give us from your experience. But we have run out of time. So I just wanted to say, Michelle, thank you so much for being my co-host today. It's been
Thank you for having me.
on. And Gera, thank you for being our guest. You've been listening to the If I Had One Wish podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for listening to the If I Had One Wish podcast. Next time, we'll be talking to another inspirational female from the housing sector who will be sharing her career story and what she's learned along the way. And of course, we'll be asking again the big question. If she had one wish, what would it be and why? See you next time.